Live from the Panera Studios, it's the Reading with Robin show, brought to you each week by my friends at Panera Bread, where 100% of their food is 100% clean. Everything from their delicious soups, the broccoli cheddar, the vegetarian creamy tomato, and the bistro French onion soup, to the satisfying sandwiches, roasted turkey and avocado BLT, or steak and arugula sandwich. And don't forget about their fresh brewed coffee and their bottomless mug. Panera is a great place to meet friends or get some work done. That's where the bottomless mug comes in. It's all at Panera Bread. And now, enjoy the show. We Were the Lucky Ones. Georgia Hunter's debut is out today. I'm thrilled to have her on Reading with Robin. She lives in Connecticut with her husband and their son. And welcome to Reading with Robin, Georgia.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to have you, and I learned about this book because you will be at the Miriam Hospital event on Thursday, March 9th, where I look forward to meeting you. So
yeah.
I heard about this event, and I said, oh, my goodness, look at this gorgeous book. I've been fascinated reading about it, reading the story, the background, and you've got this awesome quote from Paula McLean saying, we'll leave you breathless, a brave and mesmerizing debut. What's it like to get that kind of blurb?
That one I cried instantly with when that popped up on my email. That was the first blurb that I got, and talk about bringing it home. That made it real, and I never imagined that someone like Paula, let alone any of the amazing other authors who have read and reviewed the book, would put something like that out there. So I was so humbled and thrilled to receive that, as you can imagine.
Only imagine. And then it goes on the back. She puts like a whole paragraph on the back of the book. And it's really, Viking did such a gorgeous job. The jacket is beautiful with the sheet music running sort of behind it. Even I noticed because I'm such a book fiend, I take this book, and before I even get to open it, I'm just checking out every little corner. And even the way Viking has their logo up, so that the musical notes can continue
on the
bottom. The base of the spine.
I love that too. And it's just they brought it all from the front to the spine to the back, and it's so subtle. Mm-hmm. I know. I'm so glad you like it. It's so interesting being an especially first time author for me, having somebody else design your book cover, and you just kind of hold your breath thinking,
are they going to get the essence of this book?
It's the first impression, and there were several rounds. I am so happy with the way it turned out. I just think it has so much depth and richness, and I love the pop of orange. And I'm to hear you say that. The music is. That was one thing I was like, please, can we include the music? It's such a theme throughout the book, as you know. So I was so happy to see that.
The book is lyrical, and it's just such a perfect blending of the undertones of the book, the themes that guide it, and just wrapping it all together in just this orchestral gorgeousness. It's perfect. And what were some of there were other iterations of this cover. Did you get
Yes, there was one that was completely the opposite of this, actually. That was blues and greens with a white, sort of along the lines of All the Light We Cannot See, which I don't know if you've noticed, but there are quite a few out there with that sort of theme.
Oh, I have noticed. One of the games I like to play, Georgia, give you a little insight when I have my books around me, is which of these books looks exactly like some of these other books. And so I'm very well aware of those covers.
Yeah. And my first reaction was, well, so great. Yeah. It looks like All the Light We Cannot See. Is that a bad thing? Because
I know.
Clearly that's not that's a book that I would love to emulate. But
it did very well, correct.
Right,
but
and I love that book. But I do feel like where we ended up is different. There's not a lot. I mean, you are seeing more pictures of kind of people and like from behind, but I think every image is different, and the colors they picked. Yeah, it stands alone on the shelf, which is pretty neat too.
It absolutely does. And when I'm in town or I'm in a bookstore, I always make sure they stand out because I move books around when I'm in bookstores, and so This one will be. I also have a Reading with Robin display at the local Barnes & Noble, so I'll make sure that it is out there, and people will, and go to georgiahunterauthor.com, and you can see where Georgia will be. There's a list of the upcoming events all around, and also you can find her on Instagram, on Twitter, and everywhere. So what was it like? I always love to hear the moment when a debut author opens, describe what it's like to open that box or however the book arrived and what that felt like.
Oh, my gosh. I think I cradled it like a baby. Well, I came in two waves because the first was the galley. So that was the first time I had actually held it in book format. But there was nothing like the feeling of holding the hardcover. And I actually was laughing with my husband last night because he picked it up to start reading it and last night. And I walked into the bedroom and he was tucked in and had my book on his lap. And I just kind of had this moment where I was like, oh, my gosh, You're reading my book. And it's a real book. It's not even in manuscript form bound, at Kinko's. And it's not the galley. It's the real thing. And it's, I guess because this has been such a labor of love, it's been 9 years in the making, that it's very surreal, I will say. Very surreal to see it in its final, iteration. It's really exciting.
It's just, I always love hearing that because now I've seen some authors are sort of filming that first moment. It's like the gender reveal. It's almost become this thing. But when there's so much that goes into it, and you just mentioned 9 years, amazing amounts of research, soul searching, and this is your family's story that you're sharing in this novel. Yeah, so there's so much, I can't even imagine really what goes into that. And then you've got this book and then sharing it with your family. So
yes,
amazing.
That has been amazing. And I did send a galley out to the cousins of mostly my mother's generation who were so integral in my research, whose homes I stayed in Paris and in Rio and all over the States, and interviewed for hours upon hours and then followed up with questions upon questions. And getting their feedback, to be honest with you, I mean, I really held my breath. Paula McLean, that was like instant tears, just, oh my gosh, I can't believe someone like that would love my book. But then getting an email or getting a phone call or a Skype session from France from a relative whose parents I describe on the pages of my book, and hearing them talk about what it meant to them and how moved they were and how just in awe of the research and how it kind of shed a new light on what it meant for their parents to grow up in Poland, and how, one cousin said he was reading it and he was crying as he read it, and his children were asking him why he was crying, and he said it was just a beautiful moment to tell them that he was reading a book that was their story and that someday they would read it too. And those are that kind of feedback from the family, to be honest, means more to me than anything I could possibly imagine, because they were the reason I wrote it in the first place. It was for them, for the family, to honor the relatives whose lives kind of unfold on the pages, and then also to capture those stories for my son and my cousins and their kids and grandkids and so on. So you've set the family bar very high, Georgia. And on the phone with me is Georgia Hunter. You can visit her website at georgiahunterauthor.com. You must check out the blog where Georgia talks about the research and the traveling and some gorgeous photography on the pages. Her brand new novel, her debut, is out today. We Were the Lucky Ones. One of my favorite writers also has a blurb. This emotionally resonant, gripping portrait of the war is filled with beautifully drawn and wonderfully heroic characters I won't soon forget. That's Jillian Cantor, author of Margot, The Hours Count, and coming up, The Lost Letter, which is another amazing book. Yeah.
I love Jillian. That one comes, as a little side note, that one comes out in June. So,
cool. Yeah, I saw an Instagram post of hers about, I think she had received her galleys recently, too.
Yes, I know. It's very exciting when you're, and for everybody who's listening, because you're book lovers, if you're listening, visit the websites of authors, follow them on Instagram, on Twitter, on their Facebook author pages, and you will find you're the kind of people who we want to be visiting these sites because you're going to be really interested in seeing the behind the scenes and all of the fun things that we do to celebrate when books come out. So definitely check those out. I should remember more to remind people to do that. I get so involved in the story. So, so you've set the cousin and the family bar into the stratosphere. So And like with many families, and we've heard this a lot about World War II and not talking about the stories and certainly the Holocaust, this was the case. So you found out at a family reunion about this really big piece of the family history. And it's like, I know with cousins and in our own family, if you don't ask the questions, sometimes things happen, people didn't want to talk about it, or they just sort of, life takes over and you move along, and I think it's the generation now, right, who want to know everything, and it's fascinating.
It is. I think it's very interesting that there's a lot of third-generation authors right now and have been capturing these stories, and I'm so interested to know whether that's because we are distanced enough from those experiences, or maybe the survivors themselves are just more willing to talk about it because they're realizing if they don't, the stories will be lost forever. Or perhaps like my mother's generation, second generation, they were in a world where my mother talks about how she just, her father, my grandfather, just never looked back. He was just a very forward-looking person, and he saw what his religion and upbringing should have, if left to the statistics, done for his family. So why would he put them at risk, was his mentality. And it wasn't that it was some huge secret. He had, he would count in Polish at the piano, or he might mention his mother's challah bread, but it was just a piece of the past, and he was very much a forward-looking guy. So I do find it interesting. And it was, I found out of a reunion when I was 21. It was when I was introduced to many of the relatives who you meet in this book. But it was actually when I was 15 that I discovered this piece of my past even existed at all. Like, I grew up not knowing I was a quarter Jewish, or that my grandfather was born in Poland. He had changed his name as soon as he got to the States. He'd become an American. He was Eddie Kurcs.
Okay. I didn't realize you didn't know that part either. I knew you didn't know about the Holocaust, so this is a whole piece of yourself that you didn't know. Wow. Yeah,
and actually went to high school in Providence, and it was my teacher there, Ransom Griffin, who still teaches there today, assigned our class an English project to look back on our roots. He said, go ahead, interview a relative to find something, as a practice in interviewing and researching. Sure. And my grandfather had died the year before, and so I interviewed my grandmother. And we were very close. We grew up, down the street from them, so I was very, very close with them growing up. And it was in that interview that that revelation came to be. So she was the one who told me,
So they weren't necessarily hiding it. It just wasn't, ever asked, or I guess you just...
Exactly. I was 15, had other things going on in life, and you're not...
So did you say to your mother, wait a minute, hey, did I miss something?
I came back home and I drilled her. I was like, wait a minute, what did you know and what didn't you know? And why am I just learning this now? And
what'd she say? As a mother, I need to know. What did she say? Oh, no one ever asked, or it didn't come up, or I don't know.
She said it. Listen, it's just like you said. It wasn't some big secret. It's just, my grandmother was an American. So my grandparents met when my grandfather was in Brazil. My grandmother was working for the American Embassy, but she was born in South Carolina, Presbyterian from South Carolina. They got to the States after this incredible survival story has unfolded, not just for him. He was lucky he got out of Europe early, but he saw what had happened and could have happened to his family. And like I said, he just said, I'm starting over. I'm no longer Addie Kurc. I'm Eddie Kurcs. I'm going to make a name for myself in engineering and in music. And he occasionally did. He traveled back to Brazil and to France where he had family, and he would celebrate a Passover there. but it was never brought back into the house. Like I was raised Unitarian and celebrated Christmas, and it was just his way of looking forward, like I said, instead of backwards. So, yeah, she didn't, I think she felt a little badly because I was feeling a little bit like,
yeah,
I don't know.
I'm blown away, like imagining this moment, but it makes perfect sense because people came here and assimilated and raised their families.
Yeah.
I can see how that would be, that could certainly happen, but such a rich and fascinating history. And on the phone, I'm talking to Georgia Hunter. Her debut novel, We Were the Lucky Ones, arrives today out by Viking. It's just gorgeous, and you must read it. I'm just fascinated by the background story. There's so much, and as the title would suggest, these were the lucky members of, your family members that were lucky, obviously, because they went on to live and get away. So your grandfather they all went different ways, right, as they left Poland.
They scattered, which was made the research about 5 times harder, I think, because there wasn't one storyline that I could just kind of follow. Yeah. They really each had their own. My grandfather was the only sibling not living in Poland at the start of the war, but even those who were living there scattered, and my grandfather was in France trying to make his way to Brazil with an illegal visa, and so they all kind of lost track of one another and kind of came in and out of each other's lives, but my grandfather for sure lost track for the duration of the war. So I realized I needed to tell their story and write the book from multiple storylines because they were all in different places doing different things at the same time.
It's incredible the way you write it, and I mean, there's so many parts of it that are so fascinating, and the what-ifs and the bravery and the heart and the sense of family that are pervasive throughout this whole story. It's and just when we think we've read a lot about World War II, a lot of wonderful books, and there's more stories.
There's a lot out there, yeah.
You wonder, what other stories are out there, so now, right? So this started out as an assignment in school. Did you get extra time, extra credit? I mean, I just what did this look like when you brought it into school as a 15-year-old? That this project, are you going back to school with this book? Is that part of your tour?
I'm going to stop by Moses Brown, yes, and I've been emailing with my old English teacher. I'm actually going to give a talk at my grade school too, which I'm really excited about, the Gordon School in East Providence or in Providence. So I have the paper still. I think I got an A, thankfully.
I hope you got an A if you didn't get an A.
But, it was really my grandfather's side only, so it was his slice of the story. My grandmother didn't know anything really about how his parents or 4 siblings had managed to survive. So I left that project, starting with that interview, with a lot of questions still. Because she even said, I met your grandfather's family after the war. And like Eddie, they didn't speak a lot about their experiences. So those questions were basically put on hold until that reunion that you mentioned when I was 21 years old, when I met some of those relatives and kind of listened in on some stories that were being shared one night. And that's when I started to kind of get the bigger picture of this whole family saga and started hearing these unbelievable stories about babies born in gulags and, mothers hiking over the Alps and secret weddings and, escapes from the ghetto. And it just stories that even as a 21-year-old, when you're getting ready to start being a real person, get a real job. I had just graduated from college, but those stories stuck with me. And I think I can't say I left that reunion thinking, okay, I'm going to write a book about this someday. But the idea was seeded, and I definitely realized someone needed to write the stories down.
Well, nice of you to do that. Somebody else can, bring the brisket, but you've got Georgia writing the family story, and that's what's so just beyond fascinating to me, because you're taking all of these stories and, like you say, everybody's sort of scattered and then piecing it together, and the parts that it sounds like that your cousins identified with and were so emotional about was that as the writer, you're weaving in the story around it, what was likely to have happened, the pieces that you really need to fill in. And so the research that you did, certainly about this time in history, on top of the family, the recollections, the stories, I don't know who had pictures, all of this
like you had to just wrap this all around this huge puzzle you were really sort of solving, and you've left your family. I mean, if you do nothing else, you should have to like not do anything. You should be able to show up at a party without an RSVP. You shouldn't have to cook for anybody. Like you, Georgia, have done it. It's just
well, I couldn't be more excited.
Meaningful.
Great. We had so many, 4 out of the 5 Kurc siblings, my grandfather's siblings. Their children will be at my launch event in a couple of days in the city at Barnes & Noble, and I think that's going to be one of the most amazing feelings is getting to speak about my book to an audience. In the front row will be those relatives who's, were so such a big role in the research and who I met with and interviewed for to collect those oral narratives. So, yeah, I'm really excited for that.
Oh, my goodness. And then you've traveled, and there's a picture of you on the tracks, right? Is that on?
Oh, in Bari, on the train tracks.
With your son. Yeah, and then to be, like, at this station where you know what's come in and out of and how your family is involved, it's chilling, right? I mean.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was more of an uplifting feeling because that was a really kind of positive point in the story. I won't give too much away, but that evoked some being there with my son, and I know one of the relatives who was there had a young daughter at the time, and I just that was spine tingling. But visiting the town where they grew up, which you'll read the very first thing you read in the book is that this town was, before the war, home to 30,000 Jews. And by the end of the war, fewer than 300 had survived. And my family actually made up somehow a pretty significant percentage of that 300. So being in that town was definitely chilling.
Wow.
At the same time, it was, I had this sort of dark impression of it, partly because the family never went back. They never had any interest for obvious reasons, and, the history. So looking back with the perspective that we have, I had an impression of what it was going to be like. And so one of my most surprising takeaways was just how livable the city actually was. It was quaint. You can see photographs also on my blog about that trip. Like it was small. It was a community. It was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. Yeah. And I could see why my great-grandparents chose to live there and raise their kids there. And on that same side, I also stood in the place where the ghetto once was, and I touched the mezuzah that was in their doorway. And, so those pieces of it were so heartbreaking. So it was just a very interesting kind of parallel experience where, like, okay, I get it. I can see what it was like to grow up here, and then I just felt these ghosts everywhere, which was chilling. You said
just being whenever I've been in Europe, walking around and thinking who walked here, what happened here, being at a train station in Vienna and seeing an older gentleman and thinking, where were you? Just all of these thoughts that you can't help but go through your mind because we walk with the history. It's all around us, and if you're the kind of person that sort of thinks about that stuff, then it seeps in and it takes hold. And if you're there researching and meeting family and going back and retracing steps and, like you're saying, going and touching this mezuzah, it's really something. Wow. This book really just blows you away. So you've written it as a novel. Did you ever consider? Was it always in your mind going to be a novel, or did you ever think of doing it as a work of nonfiction? Fiction?
Yeah, no, actually I set off thinking it would be nonfiction just because the story was there already. So I didn't have to, the narrative, I did a little digging to uncover it, but once I kind of figured out who was where and when and how, the bones of my story were all there. So it wasn't until I had some later drafts of the manuscript that I kind of realized that one of the things that was missing, I'd stuck so closely to only the facts and only the pieces of history that had been passed down to me, whether it was in an interview or a Shoah interview or in my outside research, that I felt like the story lacked a little bit of color, like I felt like, well, first of all, the way that a lot of the Kurc siblings were described to me was very heroic, because often they were described by their children. So clearly, if I'm the child of a Holocaust survivor, I was born in the Gulag, my parents saved my life on multiple occasions, or maybe helped me escape from the ghetto, or maybe hiked over the Alps while pregnant with me. My mother and father are clearly heroes in my mind,
yes.
and rightfully so. But I felt like in early drafts, my manuscript kind of lacked a little bit of imperfection, or the characters lacked a little bit of imperfection, a little bit of color. I really wanted to get in their heads and think about what they were thinking and feeling, and the dialogue, like what they would have been saying to each other, because I wanted my readers to feel like they were there, and I wanted it to feel visceral and relevant. And so by allowing myself that creative license to really dive deep into what their emotions, the emotional piece of it, the human piece of it, I felt like it would add a lot of depth to the story. And I hope that in the end it possibly even brought the story closer to the truth, just because it wasn't conveyed to me that, Bella was terrified crawling across a meadow to try to reach her love of her life. She was clearly terrified. She had to have been terrified. So of
course.
I hope that by trying my best to imagine what they were thinking and feeling and allowing myself to fictionalize it, that it ended up
so rich, so detailed.
And bringing it closer to the truth,
Such an amazing storyteller, and you always wanted to be a writer, right? So you were that kid. You always wanted to be a writer.
I love to write. I mean, I can't say I ever thought I'm going to publish books, and but some of my earliest memories are of my father's typewriter banging away upstairs when I was like 3 or 4, and he was a writer, and his book came out in the early 80s when I was a kid, and his first, and then, I love to write journals, and I love to write about travel. So, I guess you could say I've always wanted to do this. So this is
so cool to really be so immersed. I mean, if you grow up with a parent who's a writer, I can hear as you're saying that, and I miss the sound of the typewriter.
Oh my God, it sounded like a machine gun. It was one of those you type in the line and then you hit enter and it goes.
Yeah. It shakes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a whole production number with that, but it's different now. You can sort of just hear that. Your son will grow up with the clicking of the computer keyboard, right? So does he mimic that at all? Do you see a writer in the making in your little guy?
Oh, when you ask him what he wants to be, and anybody, it doesn't have to be me. So I don't think he's just trying to impress me. But he's 5, and he'll tell you he's going to be a writer, but he's going to write children's books. So
I'm sure he will. I can't wait. I'll look forward to interviewing him on Reading with Robin at some point. And before I let you go, your grandfather was a composer, and so did you listen to his music? Was that inspiring as you wrote?
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes, and came to appreciate it so much more, as I think I came to appreciate all of my relatives so much more throughout this whole process, getting to know them in my research. But certainly the music, I just
is it on your website? Is there any of it?
There's in a blog post there is, but now that you're saying that, I think it would be nice to add a couple of my favorite pieces. I'm gonna in the coming weeks. Yeah.
Oh, good. Please do. So people can go to georgiahunterauthor.com, and some music will be added in. I would love to hear it. And visit Georgia on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram, and visit the site to see where she will be. There are a lot of wonderful events happening. One of particular excitement for me is Thursday, March 9th. You will be at the Miriam Hospital here in Rhode Island, but Thursday night in New York at Barnes & Noble on 82nd Street. Oh, my goodness, with film and theater director Thomas Kelly from Hamilton. Oh, my goodness, I'm just reading this. That's really cool.
I know, how great of a friend to have, right?
Oh, my goodness.
With my husband. He's known my husband since, I don't know, they were like 12, and I've known him for about 20 years. He read at our wedding, and it's just been a big part of our lives. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
Wow, I think so. And then you'll be at R.J. Julia and Darien and Fairfield, all over the place, Brookline Booksmith, at the Avon Free Library, Chappaqua. So visit GeorgiaHunterAuthor.com, click on events. And if you are nearby, please go. I always tell Reading with Robin audience, if there's an author event happening near you, or not even so near you, you can go a little bit. Support these events. They're so important. What's a book that you'd recommend? I always love to know what the authors are reading.
Gosh, yeah, I have so many. I have to say probably for World War II, which obviously I read a ton of, one of my absolute favorites, and it's a bit of a beast. It's big. But once you get past that, just the size of it is The Invisible Bridge by
yes.
Ranger. And she's another granddaughter of a survivor, and the way she tells her story, it's historical fiction. Her grandfather's a Hungarian living in Paris at the start of the war, a young student. I saw just so many parallels with my own story, and her writing is just gorgeous. I absolutely love that. And then one of the earlier ones, if you want the opposite of a very long read, one of the earliest books that inspired me was City of Thieves by David Benioff.
Yes.
And that's his grandfather's story as well, on the Russian side. And that reads kind of like how he's a film writer, right? So you can just see the scenes unfolding on the page, and you'll fly through it. It's short, and it's an incredible story. So those are two that I tend to recommend.
Those are great. So two ends of the spectrum. And we were the lucky ones, the book with the gorgeous cover, title, and story. And congratulations. There's nothing like Pub Day and your baby's out in the world. Georgia Hunter, good luck on tour. Enjoy and soak it up.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks again for having me.